Hello folks, welcome back to part 5 of our simple to-do app. Just a little recap of where we've gone so far. So in parts 1 to 4, we did a little brief introduction to the Xcode environment. We set up a single view app. We talked a little bit about the navigation controller, and we set up our main storyboard. This storyboard contains 3 things. It has a table view, it has 2 buttons, as well it has a prototype cell. So at the end of the 3rd video, we set all this up, and we also finished by specifying that this table view uses the view controller as its data source. So, as you'll recall, what we mentioned was a table view must get its data from somewhere. The way you do that is you specify its data source. So we've told our little table view here that it should get its data from this view controller. And remember, this view controller is the one that's in our project. So for the rest of this video, we're going to be working on our code to get all that set up. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the view controller code, and I'm going to clean up the interface a little bit by hiding the navigator and by hiding the inspector. Now, this is our code right here. Here's the reference to our table view. Here's our 2 methods for our buttons. What we have to do now is we have to set up a model. For this app so far, we've set up our view. That's the storyboard. We set up our controller. That's the code for this particular class. But we don't have a model. Remember, whenever we're doing iOS, we're usually using the MVC pattern. Well, models can range from very sophisticated multi-table databases to something as simple as a list of strings. In our case, we're just keeping a list of to-do items. For this version, it's so simple that all we're keeping is the title of each to-do item. In later apps, we'll add things like priorities and to-do dates, but for today, we're just gonna do the title. So, we can make our model very simply as an array of strings. So right here in the class, I'm going to make a variable. Remember, variable means that it can be modified. I'm going to call it the to-do list. And I'm going to make it equal to get some milk, and do the Swift tour. And there we go. We now have a model. The model's name is the to-do list, and it's an array of strings. I will be doing lots of videos about Swift itself, because if you're new to Swift, this might look a little bit weird, because nowhere did we say that the to-do list is an array. But if we alt click on it, you'll see right here it shows us that the to-do list is a string in square brackets. That means it's an array of strings. Okay, we have our we have our model, we have our view, and we have our controller. The next thing we have to do is we have to tell this view controller that it's acting as somebody's data source. you'll recall that our table view has asked the view controller to be its table source. But just because I asked it to be the table source, it doesn't know yet. So what we have to do here is, after the superclass, so right here we have a class named viewController. It's a subclass of UI viewController, which is built into iOS. After this, we can specify what we call protocols, similar to interfaces in other languages. In other words, which protocols are we going to subscribe to, or are we going to implement? We've decided to be somebody's data source, so we better implement the UI table view data source protocol. This means that somebody can ask us to be their data source, and we'll give them the data that they need. Notice right away when I added this protocol, I got an error. Why did I get an error? Well, let's read. Type view controller does not conform to protocol. In other words, we said we'll be your protocol, but we haven't done what we need to do to be a protocol. To be a protocol, we essentially have to implement some methods that the other class could call upon. Now, before I go too much further, let me just explain one brief thing. When we have a table, we've already mentioned that a table has cells in it. But a table is a little bit more sophisticated than that. A table can be broken up into sections, and those sections contain cells. So if you think about something like the settings app, there's many different sections in the settings app. There's the different types of settings. For our little app, all of our cells are going to be in a single section. So, even though it's going to look like we have no sections, our table is going to be made up of one section with multiple cells. So let's go back and write some code. The first code we have to write, and let me just put my data up here. Sorry, I'm just going to put this data together. The first thing I have to do is I have to be able to tell the world how many sections I have in my table. So I'll just write the word number. You'll see right away I get a suggestion for a method called number of sections in table. How many sections are there in our little table? Well, we just talked about the fact that there's only one. So, whenever somebody says, "Hey, view controller, how many sections in your data source?" we're always going to return what? 1. So, we've now implemented part of the data source. But notice, we still haven't implemented everything. The next thing we're going to type is the word number again. This time it says number of rows in section. Let me choose that method. So this method is saying, if I give you a section number, would you please tell me the number of rows in that section? Now, there's a little trick here because does the section number really matter for us? How many sections are there in our table? There's always one section, so there's no need for me to check the section number. I can simply return the total number of rows. So how many rows do we have in our table? Well, it's just going to be the the amount of data in our model. In Swift, we can simply ask an array. So I'm going to use self dot there. We're going to do count. So whenever somebody comes up to the view controller and says, "Hey, view controller, how many rows are there in section 0? We're going to tell them to-do list.count. Are they ever going to ask us section 1? No. Why not? There's only ever one section, and that's section 0. So, we are allowing the world to find out the number of sections. We're allowing the world to find out the number of rows in that section. But if we look, we still haven't done something. Let me just disable this breakpoint. We still haven't given out a particular row. So somebody might ask us, would you please produce a particular cell? So that one is called cell for row and index path. So I just typed the word cell. So somebody's going to give us an index path, and we're going to give them the corresponding cell. Now, what the heck is an index path? Well, remember, each cell in a table has two components to its address. The first component is which section is it in, and the second component is which row in the section. So an index path is just a combination of a section and a row. Because we only have one section, we can ignore the section number. Now, the first thing we need before we can return a cell is we have to get a cell. Remember from a few videos ago, do we actually create cells or do we use ones that already exist? That's right, we use ones that already exist for efficiency. So I'm going to say let the cell equals dot table view dot DQ. Dot DQ. Sorry about this. Let me do DQ UE. And we're going to DQ a cell that's already been made. You'll remember if we go back here and choose our cell and go into our attributes, the cell has an identifier. That's the way we say which cell we want to use. So which identifier are we going to use? Well, mine is called the cell. Which index path are we going to use? Well, we're going to use the index path that we are provided with. So, I've now gotten a cell from the queue of reusable cells. What I need to do now is populate the cell with the appropriate data. The way I'm going to do that is the cell dot text label question mark dot text. We're going to talk about the question mark in a future video, so don't worry about that for now. What should I put in as the text of this cell? Well, we should put the corresponding data from the model. So what's the name of the model? The to-do list. Well, the to-do list is made up of an array, and we want a particular row from the array. Remember, we don't care about the section because it's always section 0. So we're going to say index path dot row. So we've now put the data from the model into the cell. I'm going to do one other little thing here. I'm going to do the cell dot detailed text equals, and I'll put here by Thursday. Remember, when we look at our cell, we did the subtitle cell, so it had a title and a subtitle. The title will be the actual data, and I'm just putting by Thursday as the subtitle for now. The last step is to return the cell. So what does this little method do? It says, when somebody asks for a specific cell, number 1, get a cell from the queue so we don't have to make one ourselves. Number 2, populate the cell with some data. Number 3, return the cell so it can be put into the table. Should we try it? Let's do that. So let's take a look here. And boom, there we go. We have our 2 bits of data. So we were able to populate our data with, populate our table with our data from our model. In our next video, we're going to look at the quick add. But for now, we've gone pretty far. We've done 5 videos, and we have a working app that shows a list of to-dos. See you in video number 6. Thank you.